So this video will be an introduction into biology, specifically cell biology. What is biology and what is a cell? Biology is a natural science, just like the other branches of natural science, physics and chemistry. It's aimed at studying the living organisms, although I have problems with the definition because, for example, viruses and studying viruses, virology, is also part of biology, but viruses are not considered to be living organisms. But general definition is that biology is the natural science, or it's a natural science that's aimed at studying the chemical processes. We're talking about the anatomy and structure, movement and physiology, molecular and cellular interactions, evolution of living organisms. So what exactly is the base of biology? What makes up these organisms? What are the building blocks? So the building blocks are referred to as cells. These are the smallest life units as defined that make up these organisms. Of course, there are other structures like proteins, lipids, and polysaccharides, which also contribute to the buildup of an organism. So don't think that there are only cells stacked together, but there are other than cells, or other structures other than cells. Of course, there are different types of cells that exist depending on the organism. So there are like a variety of cells that define each kingdom. For example, bacteria. Bacteria cell is not the same as an animal cell. For example, an animal cell is not the same as a plant cell. For example, these cells are not the same as viruses, although viruses are not classified again as cells because they lack a lot of the organelles that define a living cell. Even within each organisms, there are different types of cells, a variety of cells. For example, if we look at the human body, hepatocytes, which are found in the liver, they are not shaped the same as brain cells, or specifically neurons, which are found in the nervous system, or in this case, in the brain. Neurons are not the same as cardiomyocytes or cardiac muscles, which are found in the heart. So each organ or each specific area within the body has its own cell shape or cell type, but they all have similar inner structures, let's say. So they have similar what we call them organelles, which we will talk about in a sec. But interestingly, if you look at each cell type within the human body, you'll find that it's somehow suited for its function. For example, neurons look like extension cords because they receive impulses, they gather impulses and propagate them to other neurons. So their structure is related to their functions. Hepatocytes, on the other hand, they function in metabolism, production of important proteins that are needed by the body, detoxification. So they are shaped like hexagonal, or they have hexagonal shape, which suits their function. The same with cardiomyocytes, for example. They are shaped like cylinders or rods because they are needed for contraction, so they need a lot of force and pressure, and therefore their shape is suited for their function. So to understand cells a little bit better, we will look into this generic animal cell, and in order to see what kind of structures are we dealing with within these cells. Of course, this is like a general, as I said, it's generic animal cell, so it does not necessarily resemble exactly a cell within the human body, but it has the same structures as in other cells. more or less. Some cells have more of one of these structures than others, and we will talk about this a little bit more in details in future videos. So the first structure or organelle we're going to look at is the cell membrane, which is a thin bilayer, or lipid bilayer to be more specific, that separates the internal environment from the external environment. So think of it as a wall of a factory. Basically, it separates the factory or the inner components of a factory from the external environment. So in a sense, if it wasn't for this cell wall, organelles will be all over the place, and the cell won't function anyway. The second structure we're looking at here is the mitochondria. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It's the factory that produces most of the energy the cell needs. And you have to focus on the word most, because some of the energy is actually produced outside the mitochondria. We will talk about this a little bit more in biochemistry when we discuss respiration. The next organelle we're going to talk about is a peroxisome. Peroxisomes have two main functions, the first one being its involvement in lipid metabolism, specifically the breakdown of long-chain fatty acids into smaller chains through something called beta oxidation. Hopefully we will talk about this in biochemistry. The second main function would be the conversion of reactive oxygen species, which are toxic to the cell. It may destroy the cell, may destroy the DNA and other organelles. So it's converted to hydrogen peroxide in the peroxisome, hence the name peroxisome. The hydrogen peroxide is then further converted to water. The next structure we're going to talk about is a lysosome. Lysosomes have a lot of degrading enzymes, so they break down lipids, proteins, nucleic acids, and carbohydrates. They have also important function in fighting off viral and bacterial infections by breaking down viruses and bacteria cells through the formation of something called phagolysosomes. The next structure or organelle is a vacuole. Not all animal cells contain vacuoles, but they have very important function in maintaining homeostasis, so maintaining the internal pH environment and pressure as well, the hydrostatic pressure. They do this by storing a lot of water and harmful or toxic molecules. They store ions and enzymes as well. The next structure is called a centrosome. The centrosome is an organelle that has two main functions. The first one is to organize another structure, which is called a microtubule. The microtubule is part of a bigger network defined as or known as the cytoskeleton. These function as cell stabilizers, if we can say that. So they basically hold the these organelles in their correct position. They keep the cell shape as it is. They help in transporting materials within the cell or to be exported outside the cell through these other structures referred to as vesicles. So there are like several functions of these cytoskeleton, and as I said, one of the cytoskeleton is called one of these structures is referred to as a microtubule, and microtubule is organized by these structures or this structure which is the centrosome. The other function of the centrosome is to separate chromosomes during cellular division, which we will talk a little bit more in detail when we start discussing genetics. The next organelle is the nucleus. The nucleus contains the genetic material, which is DNA. The DNA contains the code or codes for that are needed for the survival of the cell and for the function of the cell. So these codes are used to produce something called messenger RNA, which is then translated into proteins. So this whole process is referred to as gene expression. And again, we will talk about this in genetics in more detail. Within the nucleus, there is a condensed area, which is shown here. This area is referred to as the nucleolus, or the little nucleus, and its main function is to synthesize ribosomes, which are used in the synthesis of proteins. The next structure, which is connected to the nucleus here, is referred to as the rough endoplasmic reticulum. The rough endoplasmic reticulum has ribosomes attached to its membrane, and the main function is the manufacturing of protein through a process that we mentioned just now, which is gene expression. So after the production of mRNA through a process called transcription, then these little mRNAs, they are translated into amino acids and therefore proteins in the rough endoplasmic reticulum. But not all of them, of course, because there are also ribosomes which exist freely in the cytoplasm. These ribosomes are usually responsible for the production of proteins which are used within the cells. So they are not exported outside the cell, unlike the proteins produced in the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Usually they are packaged and transported outside the cell. The next structure is the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. This structure is involved in the synthesis of lipids, steroids, and also metabolism of steroids, detoxification, so the metabolism and getting rid of harmful compounds and molecules, alcohol, for example, and also drug metabolism. The next structure is referred to as Golgi body or Golgi apparatus. This structure is or function in packaging the proteins produced by the rough endoplasmic reticulum for transport outside the cell or within the cell as well. It also for the packaging and the transport of lipids as well. So it's more of a production of vesicles for transportation, for packaging. This area is referred to as the cytoplasm, and the cytoplasm contains filled with a gel-like fluid that is made of 70% water and 30% proteins, lipids, and other compounds and molecules, and ions as well, like calcium, magnesium, potassium, etc. This fluid is referred to as the cytosol. So this concludes our video for today. If you like the video and the content of this video on this channel, then please like, share, and subscribe. You may also visit our website for further updates in the future. Thank you very much, and see you in future videos.